years that the war in Ukraine has been raging. The Ukrainian people have been enduring horror after horror after horror, tragedy after tragedy. Putin is waging right now a brutal and senseless war where no sacred space has been spared. Russia has struck places like apartment buildings in the middle of cities, the train station filled with Ukrainians trying to flee to get to safety. They've gone after the most vulnerable at schools and kindergartens and even a maternity hospital. 600 Ukrainians were killed when Russia bombed a drama theater in Mariupol. And then there was, of course, the unimaginable horrors of Bucha, a town that was ravaged by Russian troops who committed despicable acts targeting civilians. I'll warn you that some of these images out of Bucha are disturbing. Back in April of 2022, we saw the wake of death and destruction left by Russian soldiers who committed heinous acts, torturing, raping, and executing Ukrainians, sometimes in front of their families and children. Our friend and colleague Ali Belshi, who spent so much time reporting on the ground in Ukraine for us as the war has unfolded, took a trip to Bucha on the day that marked 1 year since the war began. Here he is with a member of Ukraine's parliament reliving the Bucha massacre.
You show up and there's bodies everywhere.
Yeah.
Bodies that have been decomposing. They've been there in some cases for almost a month.
For weeks. Yeah, for weeks. Yeah, that was so awful. I mean, at that moment I saw already many things, but that was one of the most awful pictures I saw in my life. What was here? The car, there was the body of a small boy, probably like 6 years old, and also staying there for weeks. Like my younger child is 4 years, and
I was talking to you at the time. You had gone through Hostomel.
Yeah.
And you were discovering these things in that moment.
Yeah.
What were you thinking?
I don't know. It was like I was shocked, and I wanted revenge, and I wanted justice. Like today, after 1 year, it's the same. We want justice.
The International Criminal Court has a warrant out for Putin's arrest for his unlawful deportation of Ukrainian children. And yet, how is that guy, Vladimir Putin, who was ordered and sanctioned these crimes against humanity, received by our nation's leader, our president? Well, with comments like these.
Along very well with Putin. I fully understand what's happening. President Putin was a total gentleman. President Putin called me up very nicely to congratulate me on the win of the election.
He's running this country, and at least he's a leader, unlike what we have in this country.
Yeah, but again, he kills journalists that don't agree with him.
Well, I think our country does plenty of killing also, Joe. So.
We had a very successful meeting with Russia and President Putin, and we're just doing great in foreign affairs. We are doing so much better than anybody thought possible.
Today, Putin is being rewarded with perhaps the biggest award of this long relationship between Trump and Putin. Trump has rolled out an actual red carpet. Putin's getting a meeting on American soil after those war crimes in Bucha, after the kidnapping of hundreds, perhaps thousands of Ukrainian children. And for Putin, it's the first time he's been welcome here in a decade. That warm welcome from Donald Trump for Vladimir Putin is where we start the hour. Our friend and colleague, MSNBC's Ali Belshi, is here. Also joining us, staff writer at The Atlantic and a contributor to the Atlantic Daily newsletter, Tom Nichols, is here. We're going to start, though, with former director of the CIA, now an MSNBC senior national security analyst, John Brennan, who is here. Director Brennan, what are your thoughts when you see Trump touch Putin? I've counted at least 4 times, an arm on the shoulder, a hand on a hand. I can't imagine touching somebody like that after knowing about and seeing reporting like Ali Belshi's out of Bucha. Your thoughts?
Yeah, well, as Ali's interview demonstrated, there are so many individual stories about just the horrendous suffering that the Ukrainian people have gone through. But it's the scale of the suffering Vladimir Putin is responsible for well over 1 million deaths, Ukrainians and Russians, probably 3 or 4 times as many wounded and maimed. The scale of the atrocities and his intentional targeting of civilians makes, I think, that image of the red carpet greeting from the President of the United States particularly odious. It is really quite something that an international pariah who has been responsible for so much destruction over the past several years is welcomed. Now, I know that we need to be able to bring the fight in Ukraine to an end, and unfortunately, the only president we have right now is Donald Trump. And so I do believe that both Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin do not want this meeting to be an abject failure. I think they both have a stake in seeing something come out of it. But I do detect Donald Trump's nervousness. I think he does have some butterflies in his stomach because he knows that he has long overcommitted what he can do in terms of bringing this war to a close. And so he's into theatrics. He's a performative politician. And so there's probably going to be the press conference where they will announce something. But the big question is, what will change as a result of this meeting? Is there going to be some type of ceasefire that could lead, in fact, to some type of process that is going to bring this conflict to a close? I certainly don't expect Vladimir Putin to say that, he's going to withdraw from Ukrainian territory, and he's going to pay reparations, all the things that should have happened. But unfortunately, we are at this point now in the history. And Donald Trump, unfortunately, is the person who has to do the deal with Vladimir Putin. But the fact that you don't have President Zelensky of Ukraine involved at this point. So I expect that Donald Trump, as he's famous for saying, we'll see what's going to happen. He'll come out and announce something. Maybe there'll be some type of carrot that Vladimir Putin will give him. But it all is going to depend on what happens on the battlefront and the battlefield after this, so that we can bring this suffering to at least a temporary close that could lead to something more permanent.
As an intelligence professional and as a student of world leaders and imagery and iconography, what did Putin see when he saw Zelensky's treatment in the Oval and the carefully choreographed, coordinated red carpet walk for him?
Well, I think if Putin looks back to 20th of January, his fortunes certainly have increased. The humiliating treatment that was given to Zelensky in the Oval Office by Donald Trump, the comments that Donald Trump has made about Putin, about Russia, and now with this reception on U.S. territory at Air Force Base in Alaska, I think, again, Putin has been able to shed to I think a fairly large degree in the minds of some, certainly in the minds of Russians, this international pariah status. And that is what Putin wants to, I think, demonstrate globally. He wants to show that he is back, that he is now going to be dealt with and interacting with the leader of the Western world, the President of the United States. And so I think Putin is feeling pretty good about this. He already has won something by getting this invitation. And so I do think that Vladimir Putin detects that Donald Trump is willing to do whatever possible to be perceived as having brought some peace to Ukraine, which could be, in fact, giving away what the Ukrainians are very strongly opposed to giving to Putin.
Dr. Brennan, let me show you the conditions that Hillary Clinton said would lead to her nominating Trump for a Nobel Peace Prize herself.
There's new reporting that the Russians have hacked into some computer systems.
He is not meeting with a friend. He is meeting with an adversary, and an adversary who wants to see the destruction of the United States and the Western Alliance. But if he could bring about the end to this terrible war where Putin is the aggressor, invading a neighbor country, trying to change the borders, if he could end it without putting Ukraine in a position where it had to concede its territory to the aggressor, there must be a ceasefire. There will be no exchange of territory. If President Trump were the architect of that, I'd nominate him for a Nobel Peace Prize.
Made me laugh the first time I heard it, but the truth is, Trump has never negotiated something this complex, and he certainly never asked Putin to give something back, to give back occupied territory and negotiate a ceasefire. Where do you put the odds of being able to convince Putin to do that after all of this very public pomp and circumstance in his honor?
I think the odds are probably 1 out of 100 at best. There is no way Vladimir Putin is going to give up the territory that he has gained in Ukraine willingly. This is not something that is in his personality to be able to just withdraw and to acknowledge publicly that he made a mistake. Again, Donald Trump, who believes he's the world's best negotiator, that's why I think he realizes that this is something way, way beyond his ability to even influence in a very positive direction. So what's going to happen in these meetings, I don't know. I hope that Donald Trump stays strong, pushes for a ceasefire across the board, not just an air ceasefire, but on the battlefield, freeze that, so we can stop some of this suffering. But I really don't see Vladimir Putin reneging or pulling out of the territory that he's in now. But I would second a nomination for a Nobel Peace Prize of Hillary Clinton for Donald Trump if in fact that happens. But I see the chances of that being next to zero.
What are you thinking if you're President Zelensky today to have been excluded from today's meeting?
I think President Zelensky feels good that his European partners are staying strong with him. That strength of the European coalition, I think, is critically important to send a signal to Donald Trump that the Ukrainians, the Europeans are going to continue this fight, almost with or without the United States. And also, I think Donald Trump recognizes that Zelensky has a fair amount of support still here in the United States, including within the Republican caucus. And that's why Donald Trump doesn't hold all the cards that he would like to hold at this point. He's navigating some difficult political shoals here in the United States on a number of fronts, but also internationally. I think he recognizes that his ability to really change the trajectory of this conflict is limited, and therefore Vladimir Putin, I think, has the stronger hand, not only because he is far more experienced and far more knowledgeable about the region, the history of the conflict, and so on. Donald Trump, I think, recognizes he's out of his element here, and that's why I do think he's a bit worried. But he will still try to put as much lipstick on the proverbial pig as possible, and sending a signal that this was a very productive and successful meeting, probably going to announce a second meeting and follow up, that there is going to be serious work done. But again, this is part of Donald Trump kicking the can down the road as he is apt to do.
Director John Brennan, thank you for starting us off this hour and for your analysis and wisdom. We appreciate you.
Thanks, Nicole.
Ali, let me bring you in. I think all the time about your reporting in Bucha. I think all the time about John Kirby, who was Pentagon spokesperson.
Sure.
I interviewed him. We've all had the chance, the privilege of interviewing him. Moved to tears after sort of seeing and learning about that, probably ahead of even some of us. And I think all the time about just at a human level, how do you sit across from someone who's tortured and murdered civilians, ushered in so much heartache, and how do you do it with such glee? I mean, Donald Trump is a lot of things, but able to feign respect isn't one of them. This is genuine admiration, respect, and a desire to be close to Putin. You can't stop touching him.
Yeah.
Your thoughts about what we're seeing today?
Yeah, I mean, for a little while there, you had that split screen going on where you showed Zelensky in the White House and the way he was getting scolded, the body language, J.D. Vance and Donald Trump scolding Vladimir Zelensky, and then this thing, let alone the red carpet. But you're right, the touching, the joking, the lightheartedness about the whole thing. And then all day we've been hearing about all these extra people who are being added to this trip, which is now sounding like, well, that's probably not going to emerge with a ceasefire or any kind of a negotiated settlement, obviously, because there are 0 Ukrainians in the room, so you can't have these deals, although Donald Trump has become accustomed to this sort of thing, making deals with one party as opposed to the other. But it seems like other things are going on. They're talking about perhaps rare earth minerals. They're talking about using icebreakers in the Arctic. So it almost seems like Donald Trump might come out of this saying, well, we haven't quite got this Ukraine thing settled, but we have all these other things, which then normalizes this man it normalizes Vladimir Putin, who is a global pariah. There were complaints when Joe Biden had Narendra Modi from India at the White House, and India's issues are nowhere close to what Russia's are in terms of the humanitarian issues that they've been undertaking. Donald Trump recently in his tariffs sent a letter to the military junta that runs Myanmar. They're not recognized by the world. They were so excited to find out what their tariff rate was because it was a de facto recognition. This is a dangerous thing. When you take a guy like Vladimir Putin, who in most cases might be arrested when he lands in a NATO country, and you treat him like this, what you're basically doing is you're getting people used to the fact that this war has changed. After 3 years, something else is going on. On the right of your screen, the guy who was invaded is going to get yelled at and lectured at by the American president, and on the left of your screen, the guy who did the invading got into the beast, had a nice ride with the president, and seems to be in for a fun evening.
Tom Nichols, take me through your thoughts as you watch what Ali just perfectly described, this split screen moment. You feel like on the right is what America was, what we used to stand for, an ally like Zelensky being scolded not just by the American president, but forcefully by J.D. Vance, who once called Donald Trump America's Hitler. And then on the left, you see Trump with Putin 3.5 years into this heinous war, touching him, sharing a walk down a red carpet, ascending stairs to be photographed. White House released a photo of Donald Trump grinning ear to ear next to Vladimir Putin. It was an official White House photo release. And then it's not unprecedented. It's exceedingly rare to get into the beast with another world leader. Your thoughts?
Well, a couple of things. One of them is a reminder, watching the split screen, of how utterly transactional and self-centered this White House is. Part of the reason this whole summit happened with this seat of the pants, let's throw a party in Alaska at the last moment kind of approach, is that Donald Trump, I think, was very eager to do something with this summit that had nothing to do with Ukraine, and that was to change the news cycle. Think of all the things we're not talking about right now. We're not talking about the economy. We're not talking about tariffs. We're not talking especially about Jeffrey Epstein. We're not talking about all the things that have been driving Trump crazy over the past few weeks. I think in that sense, both Putin and Trump have already gotten what they needed out of this summit. Putin has, as I think Ali's absolutely right, been kind of re-normalized as a world leader who gets a red carpet, and you're right, Nicole, the kind of the glad handing and the touching and the backslapping. I mean, when you're meeting a guy who's, basically a mass murderer, there should be a little bit of reserve. There should be a little bit of the impressiveness and forcefulness and strength of the United States presidency behind that meeting, perfunctory handshake, perhaps. This is not two pals getting together for a ride in a Cadillac. This is a serious and awful day where hopefully, and I wish him success, and maybe I'll be the third guy to nominate for the Peace Prize, that this is the President of the United States trying to stop the butchery of an innocent country that was invaded in the middle of Europe, the first time since World War II that we've seen this kind of savagery in the middle of Europe. It's not a party, and unfortunately, this White House only thinks in terms of image and what can it do for the president and what can it do for the vice president. I apparently in the last hour we just found out the president's already sending out a fundraising leaflet, which I think is just ghastly and vulgar to do at a moment like this. So, at this point, I think if anything comes out, I think Director Brennan, by the way, I do have one disagreement with Director Brennan. He kept saying, well, Donald Trump probably realizes he's out of his depth. I don't think Donald Trump ever realizes he's out of his depth. I don't think that thought ever crosses his mind, or that he's even capable of formulating that concept that he's out of his depth and that he's in over his head. But I suspect that Director Brennan's right. They'll come out and they'll say, well, we agreed on some things, we didn't agree on other things. We're going to talk again. Nobody's mad. We're all going to go home. It's okay. And the killing will just keep going.
It's so much having sort of had the privilege of interviewing other Ukrainians, and I know, Ali, you've been there. It's so much to watch our country's president stand with the person responsible for all that suffering and all that death. It's just heinous, and it's not just Bucha. I mean, it's indiscriminate strikes on apartments that kill not enough innocent civilians to dominate the headlines for days and days, but it's the terror. It's the terror of sending your kid off to school because you want life to be somewhat normal. But you know that any day Russia could bomb anywhere in Ukraine. I mean, it's watching them scrape and struggle to get an American president who supported them to give them all the weapons they needed to go toe-to-toe with Russia. And to see all that potentially erased by an American president who just doesn't give a shit about democracy. He doesn't care about our allies. He doesn't care about a democratic allies' sovereignty. I mean, it just seems like even from the first Trump presidency, where you have people like Ambassador Bill Taylor, Maria Yovanovitch, or Fiona Hill, there's no one around Donald Trump who can even explain why he shouldn't touch Putin so many times in front of the cameras.
Those people are gone. And that's important because you needed those people to be able to say, hey, can we just explain this to you how this works and why it's really strategically important and by the way, effective on many levels to support Ukraine. But this was Donald Trump's first impeachment, right, where he took congressionally approved money to support an ally and decided to hold that off to shake down Volodymyr Zelensky. So Trump's anger at Volodymyr Zelensky runs very, very deep, right? He got him impeached the first time around because of nothing Volodymyr Zelensky did. Then you have this idea that we had Joe Biden in government. Joe Biden supported Ukraine's aims and yet was criticized for being a day late and a dollar short in a lot of cases. We were always sort of 6 weeks behind in terms of what the weaponry needed to be. But still, Joe Biden put together a collection of about 50 countries to stand by Ukraine. So, you know, NATO plus about 20 more countries. And a whole lot of other countries said, we want to be part of something like this. We want to be part of an alliance where the world will gather with us in case we are invaded. Everything about this sends a very different message. I'm very much in favor of people meeting people to end wars. I don't mind the idea that the meetings actually happen, but everything about the imagery here and the stagecraft here suggests two good guys meeting with each other to ham it up a little bit, when in fact one of those guys has been perpetrating war crimes against innocent civilians.
I'm just waiting for the protester to yell, Russia, if you're listening, we're waiting for the Epstein files. We will sneak in a break. You guys are going to stay with me. We'll have more coverage of the atrocities perpetrated by Putin's forces that seem to have been forgotten today, or at least ignored. The summit between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin, now nearing 2 hours long. Death in White House continues after a quick break. Don't go anywhere.
The location of the glasses, where people are sitting. I think he's in Alaska for one reason, energy. Some of the largest oil reserves in the world are there. We got Alaska from Russia. I think ultimately it's not going to come down to firing bullets. It's going to come down to economics. And with Trump unleashing America's energy economics, I think in this world, I think it's going to put us in a lot better place to negotiate. I think he could literally shut Russia down. And I hope that's the direction that he's going in. And I think that's ultimately where he's at. It's no accident they're in Alaska right now.
Interesting. Republican Congressman Tim Burchett of the great state of Tennessee. It's good to see you, sir. Thank you so much for joining us. As this historic Trump-Putin meeting stretches on, it's worth noting the rather warm reception given to Putin upon his arrival here in Alaska. Coming up, we're going to ask a former U.S. ambassador to Ukraine about how that might be interpreted in Ukraine. Stay with us.
To me, this is sickening on several levels, especially whenever you're talking about energy, when you're talking about drilling and doing more damage to the core of our homes, our home in general. We have seen where the infrastructure of Alaska, called the permafrost, has been melting to the degree that it not only has been destroying the roads and dismantling their bridges, but it has actually been destroying people's homes. Thousands of homes has been tremendously damaged, if not destroyed, because the planet is warming. And to think that we're going to treat somebody like Adolf Hitler like some sort of a rock and roll star, it's absolutely dehumanizing. And it should be dehumanizing to the American people in watching an American president act this way. And I have to go back to the original core of how come this has gotten this far out of sync, this far out of hand. And it goes back to the originality of what went on during the Ronald Reagan's administration, that various church members and church leaders here in America did not pick up on and support. Whenever it comes to the person that holds the cards, it's not going to be President Putin. It's not going to be President of the American people. It's not going to be any particular political leader on this planet, but it will be God the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, and it will be those who have been called, anointed in these final steps that the world is to take in holding the cards. There's no doubt I'm not perfect. There's no doubt I make mistakes. There's no doubt I have to fight through trials and tribulations just like everybody else. But to see things vomically turning out the way that they are pertaining to what Ronald Reagan initiated by calling the Russian Empire a evil empire, and to think that now we're bedding up after tangibly seeing, no longer hearsay. It's no longer he said, she said, a type of dynamics, but we have seen, just as of recently in the past 48 hours, how the Russian government is purposely attacking the civilian population over in Ukraine. The world is so turned upside down right now because of this resistance movement that started in the late 80s, that it's pretty apparent that now even our own politicians, especially our president, wants to reward those that he should be punishing and punishing those that he should be rewarding. Now, by me saying that, what kind of imagery, what kind of verbal related statements are going to be coming out of all this in the eyes of not only our enemies but the eyes of our allies, those that at one time put a great deal of trust in the American stance of what we do and how we do it. What's going to be the final imagery in their eyes, and how they're going to interpret all this?
Vladimir Putin, literally. Vladimir Putin has united Ukraine like nothing else, like no one could have expected. Putin is reviled for obvious reasons. Kidnapped children, atrocity, war crimes. And soldiers, same thing. We heard that from soldiers. However, Ukrainians have some hope that there can be an end. The Ukrainians are tired.
There's also, there was a poll. There's a hope in Ukraine, a desire for some sort of agreement. I want to put the results of this poll up. According to Gallup's most recent poll of Ukraine taken in July, 69% of Ukrainians said they favor a negotiated end to the war as soon as possible, which is up from 22% in 2022.
And the same percentage, 70%, will refuse to support turning over property, turning over territory, allowing the Russians to take legal control over them. They're willing to recognize, they're not willing, they hate the idea that the Russians are there, but they acknowledge that the Russians are de facto there on the ground. De jure, the legal acknowledgement of the Russians there, that they can't count. So they're ready to end, they want the negotiations, 69%, but 70% will say we're not ceding territory.
I know others have questions as well, Abby.
I mean, if Donald Trump comes out of this with, some kind of agreement, just in principle, and then the details, which often differ from what is announced, are much less concrete than he makes it seem. I mean, that seems like a victory for Putin. If Putin comes out of this and can say, oh, we made a deal, but then after the fact, when you look at what's on paper, it's not all there. I mean, how do the Ukrainians sort of thinking about what the many possibilities are of what could come out of this?
Ukrainians listen very carefully to what you all say on this panel, but also really carefully to what Trump has said. And Trump has said that his goal is to end the fight, end the killing. He said that over and over, end the killing. And that is something that they can obviously support. They want it to stop. They want the air, land, and sea ceasefire, not partial. They want a full ceasefire. And that's something that either Trump gets or not. If it's delayed, if it's muddy, if it's not clear, that's not
anything short of a full ceasefire. They would see as not an outcome that Trump promised.
Trump promised that. That's his goal.
Abby, I did think you said one thing. Take a look at all these tariff negotiations. And they've been months and months, series of meetings. So you just have one meeting here. There has been massive dispute, even with allies like Japan or Korea, what actually was agreed to from the investment standpoint. So the idea that there's going to be a, quote unquote, even a term sheet or a communique, anything that's normal, forget about it. Any context that you have from a prior international meeting, even the tariff negotiations, there's not an agreement after there was an announcement. So will there be an attempt to rush a headline? Yes, the details or what's actually here will be less than the headline. That's why I think everybody pause, hit pause before you hit send.
Yeah,
that would be my recommendation.
Press conference is coming up, and that's when Trump is going to set the narrative, regardless of what actually has been.
Ambassador, do you think was the U.S. too hamstrung from the beginning in the way the U.S. was willing to defend Ukraine and send weapons to Ukraine? I mean, was it enough? Was the U.S. so concerned about what Russia might do that it was never going to be enough to actually win the war against Russia?
The answer is yes. We were constrained, there's no doubt, and inhibited, and even worried about what might happen, what the Russians might do. Bill Burns has said,
who used to be former head of the
CIA,
was
the head, when he was still the head of the CIA, said that they had overreacted, that they overreacted to all these kind of saber rattlings and he said it should not keep us from doing what we need to do.
Bill, how would you assess, at least before today, Zelensky's personal standing with the Ukrainian people? I've seen potential presidential candidates begin to speak out in Ukraine now, but how do you think Zelensky stands with the people?
Johnny still is very supportive. They trust him like 60%, 58%. That's not a bad thing. Even after he had a little problem recently where he tried to take the independence away from these two anti-corruption organizations, he immediately switched when the Ukrainian citizens reacted. He flipped it over and restored that independence. So that dented the trust in Zelensky. But Zelensky has the trust of the Ukrainian people. There is not. People worry that if he is asked to make a deal, that he might say something that doesn't go along with the Ukrainians. That won't happen.
And he understands that if he's asked to give up land and things like that, he's reflecting the opinion of the Ukrainian people. He's not going to do it.
He's not going to do it. It's his own view, and it's the people's view.
Bill, let me ask you, if if they get some sort of ceasefire, in other places where Russia has been involved in taking land, like Transnistria and other places, Georgia, they can still undermine in many other ways, right? So I'm just wondering, is there a way that Putin could, say, yeah, we're going to get a peace deal, and then continue to try to get rid of Zelensky, get him out of office, undermine, sabotage, etc.? What's your...
Sure he will try, Jill. I'm sure he will try, but you bring up a very good point. If there's a ceasefire, there has to be some enforcement. There has to be some security guarantee for the Ukrainians. And to their credit, the Europeans are stepping up. The Germans, French, British are stepping up, talking about a coalition of the willing. They're talking about putting soldiers on the ground in Ukraine.
Extraordinary move. Yeah.
An extraordinary move.
Yeah. Everyone stay with us. We're waiting to learn whether President Trump is making progress in his meeting with Vladimir Putin. After Trump yesterday said that at one point he thought the Russian-Ukraine war would be the easiest to solve out of all the global conflicts. We'll talk about why it's not so simple now.
With your old provider, it all takes about 20 minutes.
Switching over took about 20 minutes.
These missed calls that our politicians has been a part of here in America for the past going on now 40 years has been devastating to our own people here in the United States. And to think that, I think it was Ronald Reagan that made the statement of never negotiate with terrorists. That we're basically negotiating with one of the biggest terrorists right now that we're seeing with our own eyes, and how that he has purposely attacked the civilian life over in Ukraine, to me is absolutely sickening. And it just goes to show you how upside down or how tainted that our original forefathers' concept was, and what that they have been willing to sacrifice, and some even the ultimate sacrifice for, in seeing an American president basically buddying up with an evil dictator that's in control of an evil empire. I didn't think that I would live long enough to see nobody top what went on pertaining to Obama sending, I think it was either 3 or 4 pallets full of $100 bills given to Iran in hopes of trying to buddy up, pay off our enemies this way. I never thought that it would be topped. But today, I think what I'm looking at is the cherry on top. In other words, there'll be severe consequences on account of this that will trickle down in political circles for years to come because of what's happening right now. In other words, I don't see this as it being a good thing. I see it as being a bad thing that's going to make that much more pain and suffering and anguish that much more realer in not just the American people's lives, but in basically the world's lives. It's awful.
But I'm not really kidding. I mean, Russia, if you're listening, release the Epstein files. Let's see how they feel about us and if those appear as quickly as Hillary Clinton's emails did, Tim.
Actually, it's become a mockery. It's become a mockery in the eyes of the rest of the world pertaining to our allies. And to think that they think that we're this gullible to the degree that we're not going to be able to see through all this, it just shows you how hideous, how grossly hideous that this remark has turned out to be, because you cannot butter up or side with the enemy, especially whenever the enemy is purposely committing war crimes, basically against his own people. Because the Ukrainian war is an internal problem with the Russian government, and to think that this is going to stop at this particular measure, at this particular point, we're only deceiving ourselves, my friends. We're only deceiving ourselves whenever it comes to compromising on our original policy stances that even our forefathers and our ancestors were willing to sacrifice for.
Things that each of these players want. For President Trump, it's a ceasefire. He wants to end the war. He wants to negotiate a deal with possible land swapping components to that, and a trilateral meeting after this meeting that would include President Zelensky. Now, on the other hand, Russian President Putin is looking at control over all of Ukraine. Now, this is his maximalist position right here. He wants to demilitarize Ukraine as much as possible, no NATO membership for Ukraine, and of course sanctions against Russia lifted as soon as possible. Now, on the other hand, President Zelensky of Ukraine wants this: not giving up any land to Russia, wants to participate in peace negotiations, which Trump might give him, and he wants robust security guarantees. So that's why each of these things is very complex, Anderson. Each of these players has a different agenda, basically.
Colonel Hayden, thanks very much. Joining me now is retired Admiral James Stavridis, former NATO Supreme Allied Commander and senior military analyst. I'm wondering what your reaction is to seeing Vladimir Putin and seeing President Trump greet Vladimir Putin on this U.S. base for the first time since a Russian invasion.
Well, on the one hand, I kind of hate it. He's a mass murderer who is committing war crimes constantly, so all of that accrues to why should we welcome this guy on a red carpet in the United States. On the other hand, I think the best path to a peace at this point has to go through Vladimir Putin. So if you have to bring him to the United States, and by the way I like to think of it anyway is he's been summoned to Alaska, territory that Russia would dearly love to snatch back but never will. He is on U.S. soil, and he is coming to see our president. So I'm kind of of two minds. At the end of the day, if we want to get to peace, and I think we do, having the meeting here, I think works.
President Trump has said publicly that he doesn't think...
And I've said all along that either something entirely good is going to come out of this or something entirely bad. After me watching the stances and hearing the tones and watching what I've watched and hearing other people talking about all this, my money is on it going sour than it is towards it going good. I hope that it does go good. I'm like the other people. I'm like Hillary Clinton. You know, I hope that he can stop this aggression, this barbaricness. But what is it going to do to us long term pertaining to those that can no longer trust us because they knew what our original stances was going back into the Reagan era to never compromise or negotiate with terrorists. Which boils down to the core origin of where this started going sideways in the latter part of Reagan's administration, in the latter part of the 80s. So whenever it comes to the true churches over here in America, standing up about the Antichrist, about the one world government, about the New World Order, about the doomsday devil's duel that it talks about in the Bible, over in the third temple that will be rebuilt over in Jerusalem. It's almost like it's a haze or a dream, just nothing no more than an ideal, which goes back to the very thing that I have accused various people over here in America about, towards wanting to make sure that I wasn't nothing no more than a paper tiger. Which tells me that the very people that's supposed to be for righteousness are traitors to it. And if you are a traitor in the eyes of God, there is no halfway measures. There is no for Christ said that either you was for him or against him. And from all indications of what I have seen and witnessed for the past 30 plus years, coming from the church world, much less the political world, I would say that they have been against true, authentic, godly, anointed peace. Because if they was really serious about this, I truly believe that the founder of the Windmill Ministries Missions, the one that's speaking it behind the camera right now, would have already seen different results coming from either the political world or the church world here in America. And so far to this day, as far as I know, I still don't get no positive feedback coming from the churches. I still don't get letters. I still don't get telephone calls. I still don't get people stopping and well wishing of this assignment that the Heavenly Father has put me on, pertaining to going up against the axis of evil. So because of it, I have no other reason to believe that this is all some sort of a scheme, and ultimately, in the end, it will be the poor people, it'll be the working class people, it will be those that are sincere, that have a sincere heart, that will be affected and hurt the worst. And it's almost, I'm going to just end this real quick by saying, it's almost as if our government has decided to side more so with unrighteousness pertaining to the Antichrist than the true righteousness of Christ. Now, once more, I'm not perfect. And I know I'm not perfect, but I know what the Word of God says, and I'm not going to compromise on the stance that the Bible has always taken pertaining to good versus evil, evil versus good. And I'm not going to compromise on the stance whenever the Bible says the meek shall inherit the earth, pertaining to God's holy, anointed, righteous people. I'm not going to compromise on the stance of saying that that's not going to occur, because I truly believe that it will occur. Not only do I believe that it's going to occur in the spirit world, but also in the physical world pertaining to the meek inheriting the earth. But with what Donald Trump is doing right now is putting out false images, putting out the wrong signals to the rest of the world that could actually hurt a whole lot more than it helps. I'm going to end by saying that it could hurt a whole lot more than it helps.
Okay, others are talking about doing moves. Democracy is at stake here. When you have people blatantly in broad daylight say we're going to redraw congressional district lines out of time, because usually the time is every 10 years during a census. No, we're going to break it up half a decade because we need 5 seats. That begins the absolute fall of democracy, that we're not even pretending anymore it's one man, one vote. It's how I can corral, manipulate state and city legislatures to get the results I want, because it's not that I want these people to vote there. I think that it is absolutely right for Newsom and Hochul and others to do what they can to save the democratic process.
Tim Miller and